to Julie Byrne. And Julie is an artist that I've represented for years, which is going to lead to our trivia question. Right now I'm representing her at Not Sheep Gallery, which is a gallery for controversial art that talks about politics, religion, sexism, ageism, racism, LGBTQ issues, a whole host of things. Muse Gallery is more for professional mid-career artists that are museum worthy, highly collectible, and professional artists. So it's kind of a different bent for each one. Julie kind of fits into both categories. Before we start talking, because Julie and I are just going to do an ongoing dialogue, which we love to do. I want to thank Reese Brothers Productions, Michael and Jim for putting this on, and mention
thank you, Jim.
Huh?
I said thank you, Michael. Thank you, Jim.
And also say that we'll be giving away a $25 gift card to Quincy Emporium to the person who can answer our trivia question. And Quincy Emporium is really cool little place to shop in the Short North. And the Short North is opening up again, people. So come visit. But you can get food there that they've made fresh every day, and also cooking ingredients and some supplies. Quincy Emporium.
Yeah, where is it?
It's on High Street. It's a really cool little place. It's kind of next to that flower store. And
where that is.
Yeah. So anyway, so this is Julie. And
Hi.
We're going to talk about Julie's clay sculptures. Julie's a graduate from Ohio State, and she has both her bachelor's and her master's from Ohio State. Julie is a clay sculptor and has done shows at the Springfield Art Museum, the Philadelphia Museum, the Houston Craft Museum. Her pieces are featured in 500 Figures in Clay.
Oh, that's right. I forgot about that.
And I'm sure lots of other parts of her resume that I haven't included here. But we're at Julie's studio now.
We are at my studio. So I could start with a little history, which includes the Ohio Arts Council. And that is that while we were talking about dates and trying to figure out how long we had been in association with each other as artists and gallerists, we're friends now too. So, but finding that date, I am reminded that I'm kind of in the studio as a physical place separate from home, because I was a recipient in '89 of an Ohio Arts Council Individual Artist Award. And that kind of got me out of the basement and into a studio. And that trajectory was sort of set in place with that money award. And then I've been teaching for them recently in the last 2 years in Groveport High School as a visiting artist. So a little shout out to the Ohio Arts Council. And I think they're wonderful.
Nice.
But it did boot me out of my basement and into a studio, which really helps. It's nice to have a place to work that is away from home. At least I find that pretty invaluable. So do we give our trivia question now, or?
We can do the trivia question now. So Julie and I, will give you a hint. We have been together professionally for over 15 years. And the trivia question is, what major life event happened in the United States in the year that I started representing Julie? Know that the gallery, Muse Gallery, opened in 1997, and Julie and I have children that kind of fall all within the same age, and they started playing together when they were 2, 3, 4, somewhere around there.
Right.
And my kids were born in 97 and 98, so that gives you a hint. What major life event happened in the United States in the year that I started representing Julie? And you win a $25 Quincy Emporium gift card.
Cool.
Okay.
It's like a call-in show.
That's right. So Julie, talk a little bit about your work. I mean, people, you know, they love it or they hate it. It is controversial at best. I don't think the intent is always to be controversial, but for you to tell a story. And even though you are wonderfully opinionated and super intelligent, and a lot of thought goes into your work, sometimes I think there's also whimsy. And
Oh, I think that's fair. So I was telling Caren earlier that I feel like this is easily, in many ways, the most self-indulgent activity I could get to have, in that almost everything that I make is at my mercy and at my whim. And I say that because almost everything has two poles. Like there's some positive to it, there's some negative. And both things are great motivators to get me into the studio and to think about. Actually, almost everything starts as a drawing. So gets me drawing, and then from drawings, my work, I go through the sketchbooks and I kind of piece things together. And we were talking also about how if you work on a piece over a bit of time, sometimes it's hard when a person sees it and says, well, what were you thinking about right now? And that's not always clear after the piece is made. Sometimes I think of it when I get a piece finished, it's like, I get to send you off to college. You're done. You're in your box, the screws are, the box is closed. I'm done thinking about you.
And so, as we raise kids, it's not always how we start that they end up. There's a whole history there that goes into making them their own personality.
Yes. And the piece is often on its own when I'm done with it. I mean, I can't do much more to it. You read about painters who go back into museums and sneak a paintbrush and a little paint and touch up while the painting is hanging. Bernard used to do that. But Bernard was notorious for going into the Louvre and touching things up. Yeah. But so the piece does get to have its own life when I'm finished. But I would say the work has sort of a shifting foundation of plates, and not all of it starts from the same place emotionally, but it's a reflection of dreams, people's stories, sadly, some the news. Although I worry about making work that's too timely, because the news moves very quickly, and I would never want to trap a piece so completely to a single event, even a giant event, because I feel like then it gets written off as, oh, well, that's, that's about.
Well, some of your pieces have kind of referenced historical events.
They have, but I guess I don't want to keep them too tied to a single moment in time, because
right.
That isn't interesting to me about work. When I look at other person's artworks, and I'm always looking, and I'm an artist, so my view is greedy. I don't always just look for personal gratification. I'm always looking for information and thought processes that are interesting for me to think about for them. So that all just sort of gets amalgamated into what I do here. So I don't look at artwork just because it's fun to look at. I'm always sort of seeking information that sometimes is only useful to me. So I think that that's my motivation to looking at other people's artwork is a little different than a museum goer who may not be a visual artist.
Can you show us some of your work so that people have a reference?
Yes, and let me just pick up the iPad and move it around the room. So I was telling Caren this story about my friend Nina, who I went to graduate school with, and who makes work for a living, but she doesn't make her own work. She only does commissions. And so I don't know how.
Can you see your image in the corner?
I can see the studio's image in the corner.
So that's what everyone else is
That's what everyone else is saying. Wow, so this is my studio. It's kind of crowded. I'll walk over here so that you can see. These are like library stacks of work. When I finish a piece, it goes into a wooden box with a painting on the outside. So that's what all of that is. And it's kind of too much stuff. So I was telling Karen that the struggle with whether to continue to make work perhaps now that I'm in my 60s, I always think, wow, what am I going to do with all this stuff? What are my kids going to be faced with when I'm gone? But that hasn't been a worry enough to make me quit making work. So,
If
but
they
yeah,
really don't
life
want
around
it,
me.
I'll take all of it.
Well, that's very sweet of you, but when it's heavy, you'll get tired. You'll get tired lifting.
I'll make a
stuff.
whole Julie Byrne room. Like I'll make walls
Oh.
of the boxes and put the sculptures.
No, Caren, careful.
I sound like a creepy stalker there, but
No, it doesn't. And I respect everyone's choice to live with what they like. I think that's really exciting. I was telling Caren earlier that now I've reached a point where I want to ask my kids their opinion of artwork that I acquire, just because I feel like I extend that piece of artwork's safety zone if I know there's yet another person in line who might value it. And that's kind of something to think about too as you get older. What's going to happen to all this stuff? Maybe people won't even like it. So,
I think
but don't worry.
I'm on the opposite end of the extreme. As a gallery owner, I think it's my responsibility to push people past their comfort zone and always try and make them look at something that might have been challenging at first or difficult in a different way. And so I think there's a growth process to that. So I think to my dying day, my mission will be to continue to try and push people to look at artwork that they might not have looked at previously. So, as much as I understand and appreciate your concern for what your children are going to do for things, I think I'm going to continue to try and make my kids see things that they might not have otherwise considered or seen before.
Well, that's exciting too, though. That's their journey, and that's always. I was very pleased to learn. My son traveled a lot in the last decade as a young man and an unmarried man, and I was always pleased when he'd say, well, when I was there, I went to the museum, and I think, oh, thank God. I went to Los Angeles, I went to 3 museums, and I thought, oh, thank you.
Yeah.
That's a priority for them. They get drugged to museums, but I didn't know whether, they consider that for themselves. But it was nice to hear that even regional galleries are interesting to them. So
we've influenced them.
Mm-hmm. That's a good thing.
Talk about your work and what you're thinking as you start something. And I know that's evolves and changes.
It
what motivates you?
I am very lucky to get to tell a story with my work. And I do kind of think of the work as a bit of a narrative. Sometimes I think of all of it as like a movie. And when a piece moves on because someone buys it, it's like, oh, I just edited that section out. Because there is a little bit of a continuum for me. My work hasn't changed a bunch in 20 years. It was all over the place. Well, more than that, in 30 years. But when I was a young person, when I was in my 20s and 30s, I felt adrift a lot of the time until I sort of got my bearings. And I feel like that I've kind of hung on to that a little bit. And just, it's evolved, and I edit it, but finding your voice is one way to do that. And so part of finding my voice was realizing I could take stories, use a cast of characters, and reuse them. So I have a cast of characters. I have human figures, I have dogs, sometimes benevolent, sometimes pitiful. And so you can create, I especially love using rats and trying to make them not pitiful so much, but I like to create them so that sometimes they have an expression that makes me feel empathy for them. But they are really us. And so I realize everything in it, all the characters in the work is all of us. And maybe it's all me at the same time because I've created it. But rats especially for me strike a chord because they are so like us. They are so us. They're fierce parenters. They're filthy. They ruin every environment they're in. They're clannish. they're everywhere, they're indomitable, and those are all very human characteristics. They suffer from disease. We share disease with them. Medically speaking, rats are definitely us. We would be nowhere without rat research to corroborate findings in medicine to move us forward. So rats are an especially fond little character. And sometimes when I'm stuck, that's exactly what I do. I run through my cast of characters, rabbits, rats, dogs, and hope for a possible journey through a piece that's giving me problems.
I
So
wish you could show people the rat you're working on now. I love it. And the story behind it.
called Weeping.
So hilarious. Oh, and
Hilarious.
this is something I want to say too. The relationship between Julie and I is especially important, I think, and sentimental to me because I would never tell Julie what she could or couldn't make because I could or couldn't sell it. I love what she does, and so to me, I just try and share that passion and that enthusiasm with people and try and get them to understand the story so they feel comfortable enough to live with pieces. But I wouldn't want to influence or change what she's doing at all because I think that would entirely disrupt the process and the growth and the storyline. This rat, she sent me a post last week and she said, maybe it's too wild or maybe, you won't like it. And I thought, oh my God, it's hilarious.
Well, it's kind of the big, she's like 30 inches tall, maybe 27 inches tall. She's just going to fit in the kiln. And she's holding a Kleenex. And there's something, I feel like she's like us. She's doing that bit of hand wringing, the woe is me role that we have right now with the world very uncertain. And at the same time, we are just a blip on the continuum of humans on the planet. And it's like when we wring our hands over global warming, but we still drive our cars.
Yeah.
Really, it's all we're all of this is our own doing to a certain extent. And so I just thought, well, I'll just be like a little rat and I'll wave a hanky and wipe the tears from my eyes. But and sometimes I feel like, well, that's kind of the level of engagement that we all have. I'm guilty of it as well, because it's hard to keep all of the things that are troublesome about the planet in the forefront all the time.
Well, especially in today's day and age. I mean, there's so many things to talk about and so many things to worry about and so many things to just contemplate and debate and argue. It's exhausting. I find relief, I think, in your work a lot of times because I think it's emotionally it's emotionally relevant and it's really touching, but I also find humor in it, and I find
good.
Yeah.
That's always horrible.
It's an interesting way to look at life. But by the way, I just got a little poke to re-mention the gift card to Quincy Emporium and the trivia question.
Okay.
So,
we have any answers yet?
Huh?
Do we have any answers yet? How do they answer the question?
I don't know. But the trivia question is, Julie and I have been together for a long time professionally. I've represented Julie at both Muse Gallery and now Not Sheep Gallery, and we have become friends over the years. We've been working together for a long, long time. So the trivia question was, what major life event happened in the United States in the year that I started representing Julie? And to give you a hint, I opened Muse Gallery in 1997. And it was somewhere when our kids were 3, 4, 5 years old that we started representing Julie.
A few years later.
Huh?
It was a few years after that. So yeah, there's only been a couple big things.
Yeah. And apparently you can answer through Facebook or YouTube, and you'll get a $25 gift card to Quincy Emporium. And again, to thank Michael and Jim Reese for putting this on through Reese Brothers Productions. And we're talking with Julie Byrne at her studio, or Juliellen Byrne at her studio, and she is a clay sculptor. And we're talking about her cast of characters and just kind of the story that her work tells people.
I think it tells a story, and it's very often a different one than maybe I had in mind. And so I'm not sure that visual artists can be called authors, or certainly not authors of, I don't think of myself as a fiction author, but it's all in that sort of same vein. And there is something about the muteness of visual arts over written arts or sound arts, because I don't have to say anything. And it's something I get to step away from when I'm done. It's not that I'm abdicating responsibility for what I've made, but it is its own thing when I'm finished. So there isn't really anything I could say to defend or prop it up. You sort of see it and respond, or you don't. And we have, I mean, of late, there's been some pieces that are represented in this next show that Caren has for July. And there's a very sweet piece involving a bird and a person. And I guess some people read it with some intentions that are different than I imagined. So it's hard when you combine, there's a risk you take, I guess, when you combine people and animals, and people bring very unusual perspectives to the table with that. So
you had no political intent with Eat My Tweet?
Oh, I absolutely did. I absolutely did. But I feel like it's a very tiny voice. It's hardly a message big enough to even begin to offset the wave of different offensive things we have to process and move past. So I thought,
the piece we're talking about is called Eat My Tweet, and it's in the gallery now.
Tiny little piece.
It's like 24 inches or something. I mean, it's big. It's really wonderful. We had proposed it for the new mural project in the Short North Alliance, and the building owner, where it was going to go, was offended by it. And so they didn't want anything political or controversial, which is kind of difficult for my gallery and for my artists. But, so we put up another image of Julie's called A Little Wrong, and which is also a really powerful and poignant piece, but talks about a different aspect of controversy, which I think is a little bit religion.
A little bit religion, yeah, yeah, it's about spirituality and who's allowed to have it and how we evaluate it in others, which always is surprising to me. It's like this little checks and balance system there. I worry that sometimes people use well, you're not religious enough, and we do that when we vote and when we talk about politics and who's voting for who, and religion does play a pretty prominent role in helping people decide how to vote. So, and really religion doesn't have that much to do with it in terms of good spiritual behavior is one thing. And then sometimes religion becomes something else. Yeah. So that's usually as far as my message cares to go. It seems to me very much like I'm stating the obvious. In fact, sometimes I think it's a blunt cudgel. But then it seems to take some people by surprise. So we all have our little comfort zones, I guess. So.
Yeah. So both of those pieces are displayed at Not Cheap Gallery in the Short North now, along with some of Julie's smaller pieces, which are also pressing buttons. They're funny.
A little bit. So that piece is there's a series of man and dog pieces, and they actually started with fully half the people in my family are dyslexic. And there, of course, is that very funny God-dog switch around that is so easy for dyslexics to play around with. And so I had seen this Bible passage. It's in Psalms. I think it's 22:20. but it's beseeching the Lord to save my darling from the power of the dog. And I thought, oh my God, that's the most beautiful little passage I think I've ever read. And my father-in-law is a Yale divinity scholar, and as his wife is also the second Presbyterian minister in the state of Ohio who was female. So they both are very familiar with the Bible. And when I called them and read that passage to them, my father-in-law said, that is not in the Bible. And I was like, yes, it is. And they even talk about unicorns, but it's in Psalms, and Psalms are about stories. So that really kind of set me down this path with what are essentially little boys and dogs, and the relationship that the two things have to a wordplay with dog and God and expected behaviors. So I've had some fun with it. And I think it's good to have a little something to chew on. As I think about what motivates my work, I think that there's some themes. There's a poem by Jean Valentine, who I think was New York State's poet laureate. And the final line in the poem is, "You who the earth was for." And it's a short but very sad poem. But I love that line because I think "You who the earth was for" is about everything. Everyone falls into that category of the earth being for them. And so that's kind of there's been pockets of my thinking about that when I make work. I also love to ponder the idea of a cradle, a casket, and a boat, because I feel like those are all the same things. And they take us visually from birth to death. And they're all a kind of a vehicle. And so that's another idea that I sometimes chew on when working in the studio. And it has to do with safety. It became particularly important, a thought pattern, when, the plight of boat people. And I suspect that behavior of jumping on a boat in absolute desperate need to get to a better place is still going on, but we have kind of eclipsed it in the news with the coronavirus. So I do think about immigration some, and that sometimes motivates me. But again, that falls into that cradle, casket, boat thing about how we should all be safe as humans and be in a place that's, we should seek passage to be wherever we need to be safe. And that should be a respected thing. And it's hard when it's not. And again, I think probably we don't think about it often enough. It's been particularly easy to forget about it, the plight of immigrants, since COVID. Although the Dreamers got a little reprieve this past week, which is pretty exciting.
Yeah.
Unexpected and exciting. So, yeah. But I think those categories of thoughts are kind of where I go. There's
it's interesting. That's a universal theme, I think, with most of the artists in my both galleries. I look at like Char Norman's work, and I often describe her pods as both cradle and reliquary. And Randall LeGros does a lot of pieces with
Randall
boat.
Is a boat guy, yes.
Yeah.
And that atmosphere.
And I think he actually did a painting one time called "You Who the Earth Was For."
Oh,
and,
nice. Well, you may know the poem. He may be, he may be familiar with the poem.
I'm sure he is. Well, he used to be a poet.
Oh,
so it's interesting because I think those are themes that, whether consciously or subconsciously, I grapple with on a personal level all the time, and what I want to talk about with the art that I show in the gallery. And so it's interesting that even though you guys have very different styles and there are different techniques and different mediums and materials, that same theme is kind of running through a lot of the artist's work.
It is. And I feel that one. And the work plays with scale too, because Char's delicate little pod passages, and then you move through that same theme with larger 2D work, and it's very obvious. It's a presence. I hadn't really thought about it until you said that, and I thought, oh.
I hadn't either until you said that about the cradle and reliquary, and I thought, man, that's a story that I explore a lot with all of the artists that I represent.
Maybe that's human. Maybe we, isn't it Toni Morrison that said, death is the thing we've been preparing for since we were born. So, on some level, I think that's absolutely true.
I don't know how much more time we have, but I want to show this piece that I own. That's one of my favorite pieces. It's a terrible view of it, but anyway, I put it on a stool so you can kind of see it.
Isn't that I'm Afraid of Everything?
Yeah, this is called I'm Afraid of Everything. And it's a little purple rat and a person sitting on a stool, like doing this, acting all, concerned. And I often think about my own life and just how telling that piece was for me. Over the 20 some years that I've had a gallery, I can't tell you how many times I've wanted to quit. And Bill said, think about, Caren, what your alternatives are. And do you really want to quit? And what are you afraid of? And somebody told me one time that I was my own worst enemy. And I think a lot of times we do get in our own ways and we have to stop and think, what are we really afraid of? And is that connecting? Is that talking about things that not everybody's going to agree with? Is that saying things that might change the course of history, but might also bring you harm? And I decided that I'm not afraid of that anymore. And so that piece was especially important to me.
That's nice. I worry that the very idea of getting to have an idea that's a little bit controversial, I think there's an ethic in the way we're thinking right now that we are seeking polarizing views. So where you could hear someone's opinion, think about it, maybe allow it to influence you a little. It didn't have to be like you were part of one doctrine or another. And I think right now we're in a place where you're like either in camp A or camp B. Mm-hmm. And it's a little narrow. It's a lot narrow, actually. And the wiggle room in between is a vast void. It's like a cavern. It won't always be that way. I think humans run in cycles. I mean, if you look at history, we certainly do. So
I think that's one of the few saving graces is that if you read history, if you think about history, if you look at history, is that we keep making these same stupid mistakes and doing the same stupid things. And somehow human race continues to exist and evolve. And maybe someday we'll be able to work past all that. But
right, when you think about the punishments for heresy,
yeah.
and all that is disagreeing about God. Well, really?
So you can see how Julie and I kind of go off on these tangents about politics and religion and life and stuff. But her work kind of informs a lot of those conversations. It touches upon a lot of things that are controversial, but are endlessly fascinating and interesting and important and relevant, and that we need to talk about in today's world. And that, which is why I think Julie's work is so important, and why I think that you need to keep making it regardless of what you think your children are going to do with it.
Yes,
I think you just need to keep telling the story. If you're an author, you need to keep writing the book. And if you're a painter, you need to keep painting the painting. And if you're me, you need to keep pushing people outside of their comfort zones. And
that's a way you can think of it as permission giving too, which I think is a very powerful thing. Yeah. You have to give yourself permission before someone else can suggest something and you can run with it a little bit, even if it takes you a little while to get there.
Yeah.
There's a little gift in that.
I think so. We were talking too, speaking of permission, about people wanting to live with these big sculptures that, are confrontational sometimes, or at least conversational. And it is like inviting a person into your house. And just like Julie and I are doing on this podcast, I think a lot of times when people come to my home or to Julie's home and see the work, it starts a conversation, and it makes you think about things. And I think that's what great art should do, is make you think and talk. And if you're looking at a piece of art that just is filling a wall space or looks pretty, then it's not really great art. So what you're doing, Julie, I think is ultimately important.
Well, Sophia and I were in the store this week, and Barb Vogel gifted us with a couple of paintings, and they're so sweet. And one is her mother. And I remember Barb had told me a story about her mother was in Granville, I think, where she was raising her family, Barb included, and they needed a well dug. And Barb's mother just picked up the stick and told them where to dig, and there was water. And I thought, oh, she was a diviner. My God, that's amazing. And Sophia just got a little painting of her mother from some point in time. And it was such a sweet thing to think about.
All right, so I think we're out of time. We've talked a little bit over 30 minutes. We have a winner on the trivia question, and it's
good.
Barb Vogel. Barb Vogel's another artist, so I do not represent Barb, so there wasn't any cheating. She covered her bases by saying it was either Princess Di's death or 9/11. So
Princess Diana, I didn't even think about that.
Yeah. So
yeah, she died in a mistake.
Barb, you win! Yay! And you'll get a $25 gift card to Quincy Emporium. Enjoy that. Julie and I will continue our conversation forever, probably. We do this every time we get together. There's never enough time to talk about everything in the world.
And thank you, Michael and Jim. The processes we do with you are always.
Thank you, everybody. Thanks for joining us.
All right, take care.
Bye.